Hello everyone, my name is Jamie Evans and welcome to Conspiracies and Cover-Up. This is my first video in the series, and what I'll be doing is I'll be doing makeup at the same time that I do talk about conspiracies. You'll have to bear with me putting on what I've put on for years. Since I was 16, I've used this, which is Revlon Color Stay Longwear Makeup. Now it's good, it says for 24 hours, and it does do its job, I think. So we're going to start, and we're going to use one of these brushes to apply it. This one says it's Complex Culture Precision Concealer Brush. Now I like this brush because it applies it evenly. Along with makeup, we're going to be discussing conspiracy theories surrounding the John F. Kennedy assassination. It's been 61 years since Kennedy has been assassinated, and even with all those years behind us, there's still 16,000 records that remain classified and have not been released by the National Archives, even though they were supposed to be released in 2017. I don't know why they haven't been released. I'm not sure what the thing is behind that, but Mary Farrell Foundation has filed a lawsuit. No, the Mary Farrell Foundation is the nation's biggest repository for Kennedy documents, and they filed a lawsuit asking for those remaining documents to be released. Now, I'm not sure what's going on with that lawsuit. It was when Biden was in office. Now that Trump's in office, not quite sure where that's at. I'll do a little bit more research on that, at a later date, and maybe do a snippet video. But I know that there is a lawsuit filed to release those remaining documents, and not sure if that's going to happen. I don't know why they wouldn't just release them. I don't get it. There's no conspiracy. Come on. Release the documents. Maybe they just want people to think that way, Who knows? Anyway, like I said, it's been 61 years, and the Kennedy assassination is one of the most prolific events fraught with conspiracy theories, and we'll dive into those in just a bit. But I first want to discuss that there were numerous assassination plots before that fateful one in Dallas that I wanted to discuss. Well, I want to discuss one in particular, the one in Chicago. To me, it helps to decipher which conspiracies could be plausible and which conspiracies are just plain ridiculous. It just has a little bit of, I guess, political background to it, the plot in Chicago. Anyway, I'll just tell you what happened. So on, I guess what was supposed to happen, John F. Kennedy was supposed to arrive in Chicago on November 2nd, 1963. And he was supposed to go and watch the Army Air Force football game at Soldier Field. Now, the newspapers had all printed John F. Kennedy's route that he was supposed to take from the O'Hare Airport to Soldier Field. So everyone knew where he was going to be. It wasn't like it was a secret or anything. And a Secret Service agent, I guess, had told a local news station about this plot in Chicago, and that a man by the name of Thomas Valley, who was an expert marksman, he was a huge Kennedy denouncer, didn't like him at all. He had arranged to be off work and in Chicago when Kennedy was supposed to be there. So that raised suspicions in itself. Oh, that light shot everywhere. Nice. And I guess, I don't know how, I don't know the events surrounding Thomas Valley's arrest, but I guess he was arrested and he had an M1 rifle on him, a handgun, and 3,000 rounds of ammo. Now, if that doesn't sound a little fishy, then I don't know what does. But why they arrested him, where they arrested him, I'm not quite sure about. Don't know how that came about. I don't even know if they questioned him. Well, I'm sure they questioned him, but I don't know what came about that, and if he admitted that he was going to assassinate Kennedy. What happened with him, I don't know. Not quite sure. So that was the number one red flag. Number two red flag was that a Secret Service agent told this local news station that a hotel manager had called the Secret Service or some sort of officials and stated that she had rented a room to 2 Cuban nationals. Don't know how she knew they were Cuban nationals, but that's what she said, and that she had witnessed and saw on the bed in their hotel room numerous rifles with telescopic sights and printed out route that Kennedy was supposed to take from the O'Hare Airport, which I guess brought him right past this motel. So here we are. That's a little fishy too. Now, Kennedy ends up canceling this trip because of all these threats. And what was told to the American people was that the president had a cold. Couldn't come up with anything better than that. No, president's got a cold, got to cancel Chicago. Not sure what happened with the Cuban nationals either. I don't think anybody questioned them. I don't know if they were ever detained. I have no idea what happened with that. That's what happened in Chicago. And there were also numerous other plots and threats to assassinate Kennedy. There was one in, I think 2 in Florida, and then a couple elsewhere. But Kennedy, so my guess, since Lyndon B. Johnson was vice president, his hometown is Texas. Dallas, Texas. And I'm sure that he had a bit of a discussion with the president saying, hey, we could win back this state, because I guess Texas was not a Democratic state. They were Republican. They didn't like Kennedy. And so my guess is that Lyndon B. Johnson and Kennedy had a discussion saying, hey, we can win back this state. It's my hometown. We should definitely make a point to go down there and have a trip. Okay. I'm guessing Lyndon B. Johnson pushed for this trip. And Kennedy was like, yeah, we definitely need this. So I just thought it was interesting that there were numerous plots to assassinate Kennedy before, like I said, that fateful day in Dallas. And they didn't do anything more. Like, oh, hey, let's put the president in an open limousine in Texas where he's not liked. You know, it just seemed like they did everything wrong. But we'll dive into that in just a second. So the Secret Service was deeply troubled about that visit in Chicago, so they were glad that he canceled it. Like I said, this is makeup I've used for years. This is Coty Airspun Loose Face Powder. This is my setting powder. So the president was adamant about going to Texas and mending the political divisions within the state. Regardless of how many threats, I think the trip would have taken place no matter what. So on November 21st, 1963, the president and First Lady Jackie Onassis Kennedy arrived in Texas. And the morning of November 22nd, the Kennedys traveled from Fort Worth to Dallas, Texas, and the motorcade began. And once again, the president's trip was posted in local newspapers, so everyone knew where he was going to be. Which, nowadays, that just does not happen. And all these, fans and whatnot, and according to Lady Bird Johnson, now if you want to read anything poetic and, I guess, a beautiful way to put something that was very, very traumatic and terrible for not just the people involved, but the whole United States of America, was deeply, deeply touched by what happened to President Kennedy. He was a very well-liked president. And Lady Bird Johnson, Lyndon B. Johnson's wife, her statement to police describes the day very beautifully. I guess there was, people waving and smiling and welcoming the president, and they were very shocked at that. So they were having a great day. And at 12:30, as the president's open limousine passes the school book depository, school book depository in Texas, shots were fired. Kennedy is struck once in the back, in the upper back, and once in the head. And despite rushing to the hospital, he's pronounced dead at Parkland Memorial Hospital at 1 p.m. on November 22nd, 1963. At 1:15 p.m., Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit was shot and killed in a neighborhood a few miles away. Like I said, at 1:15 p.m., J.D. Tippit, a Dallas police officer, was shot and killed in a neighborhood a few miles away from where Kennedy was assassinated. At 1:50 p.m., Lee Harvey Oswald, who is an employee at the Texas School Book Depository and former Marine with Soviet ties, is arrested for the murder of J.D. Tippit, the police officer, and then later charged with Kennedy's assassination. On November 24th, 1963, 2 days after Kennedy is shot, Lee Harvey Oswald is being transferred in police custody, and he is shot and killed by nightclub owner Jack Ruby. That event deepens the suspicion of a cover-up. Why else, especially in police custody, would the man charged with assassinating the most well-liked president of the United States of America at the time killed by a nightclub owner? Really? I would say it was to shut him up. And before this, Lee Harvey Oswald had always claimed, I don't know, always, because he was only alive for 2 days after he supposedly did this assassination, allegedly. He claimed he was a patsy, that he was used as a pawn and it was pinned on him, when in fact there was a conspiracy. The official investigations began. Now, there was an investigative committee called the Warren Commission that was hired by Lyndon B. Johnson, who is now president of the United States, because the president's dead, so the vice president is now president. So he hires this commission called the Warren Commission. There were 7 members on this commission. Earl Warren, he was the head of the commission, hence the name, the Warren Commission. And he was the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. So he's pretty high up there. Gerald Ford was also on the commission, and he is a U.S. representative from Michigan and later a U.S. president. Alan Dulles was on the commission as well, and he was the former CIA director. Richard Russell Jr. is the U.S. Senator from Georgia. John Sherman Cooper, a U.S. Senator from Kentucky. Hale Boggs, U.S. Representative from Louisiana. And John McCloy is the former president of the World Bank and U.S. High Commissioner for Germany, whatever that means. So those were the 7 members. So we have this commission, and here's what they concluded after their months of investigations. They concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald, why is that so hard to say? Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in the assassination. That Oswald fired 3 shots from the Texas Schoolbook Depository, and there was absolutely no conspiracy, either domestic or foreign. None. Okay. They also concluded that Jack Ruby acted alone in killing Oswald. Okay. That's basically their findings. All right. Despite the commission's findings, controversy and skepticism have surrounded the report ever since. Many critics point to the perceived flaws in the investigation, inconsistencies in witness testimony, and the single bullet theory, which we'll get into. These doubts have fueled numerous conspiracy theories, obviously, about possible involvement by the CIA, the FBI, Mafia, Cuban government, Cuban nationals, etc., etc. Numerous conspiracy theories. So, let's dive into those. Okay. That's what we all came here for, right? So the first conspiracy we have is the second gunman grassy knoll theory. The claim on this is that there was a second shooter that positioned himself on the grassy knoll in Dealey Plaza. The evidence on this is that the eyewitness reports, they report hearing numerous shots from different directions. And the acoustic evidence, I guess, from a Dallas police officer radio recording suggests multiple gunshots. And I guess there's the Zapruder film, which is a home video of the assassination. It shows Kennedy's head jerking backward, which some interpret as evidence that he was shot from the front, not from Oswald's position behind the motorcade. But a counterpoint on this is that experts in later investigations, including the House Select Committee on Assassinations, didn't know there was a committee on assassinations, but I guess there is. They disputed the acoustic evidence and the Zapruder film. So they said, nope, sorry, doesn't work. No conspiracy there. Okay. The second conspiracy theory is the CIA involvement. The claim on this one is that the CIA orchestrated the assassination due to Kennedy's dissatisfaction with their actions, especially after the Bay of Pigs invasion. And I guess Kennedy had a plan, to reduce the CIA's power. So that's what the claim was for the CIA involvement. And the evidence on this is that Kennedy reportedly wanted to reform or dismantle the CIA altogether. How you do that, I don't know. It's a pretty big department to just say, okay, we're not using you anymore. The evidence, I guess, besides that, was that Allen Dulles, a former CIA director who was fired by Kennedy, was a member of the Warren Commission, and that further led to suspicions of conflicts of interest. There was alleged connection between Oswald and CIA operatives, and a CIA officer, Howard Hunt's, I guess, alleged deathbed confession that stated the CIA was involved. Because that's kind of big. CIA operative confesses on his deathbed that the CIA was involved in the Kennedy assassination is kind of huge. But no, we're just not going to listen to him. He's just full of it because he's dying. I don't know. I'd say he wasn't full of it because he's dying. But what do I know? So we're... Okay. So number 3 on the conspiracy theories is the mafia involvement. The claim on this is that the American mafia killed Kennedy. I guess because brother Robert F. Kennedy, Kennedy's brother Robert F. Kennedy, was trying to crack down on organized crime. The evidence on this was that mafia bosses like Sam Giancana allegedly felt betrayed after helping the Kennedys' election and then facing aggressive prosecution. I don't know what that means exactly. Maybe they were brought in on, were arrested even though they helped Kennedy. But it sounds like they were pissed off, according to the evidence. So Jack Ruby, who killed Oswald, was reportedly linked to organized crime. Which I can see Jack Ruby, a nightclub owner, being linked to organized crime, for sure. Reports suggest that mob figures had ties to the CIA, which further, and anti-Castro operations, blending both conspiracies. The counterpoint on this was that, and then also figures in the mafia reportedly boasted about their involvement. That one to me is kind of huge. Yeah, let me just, boast about killing Kennedy, but no, I didn't do it. But I just want to pretend like I did. Weird. Counterpoint on this, guess what? No solid evidence directly ties the mafia to the assassination plot. Okay, that's all I got. All right, so let's go on to number 4. Cuban government involvement. So the claim on this is that Fidel Castro's regime orchestrated the assassination in retaliation for CIA-backed attempts to overthrow or assassinate Castro. The evidence on this is the Operation Mongoose and other U.S. plots against Castro provide motive. Oswald's support for pro-Castro causes and his visit to the Cuban embassy in Mexico City weeks before the assassination raised suspicion. Yeah, I'd say that's a little suspicious. And then the counterpoint on this is that Castro denied all involvement. Of course he's going to. And no credible evidence has emerged proving Cuban involvement. Except what the hotel manager saw in the hotel room. But who knows what happened to those guys, right? So let me finish my lining of this here. Yeah, so number 5 is the anti-Castro Cuban exile theory. So this one says that either Fidel Castro ordered the hit in retaliation for CIA attempts on his life, or anti-Castro Cubans did it because they felt betrayed by Kennedy's handling of the Bay of Pigs invasion. I'm going to have to do a little bit more research on the Bay of Pigs invasion. Not sure what happened there. I'm really not sure about that. But the supporting points on this was that Oswald was involved with the pro-Castro Fair Play for Cuba Committee, whatever that is, and that anti-Castro groups were heavily armed and well-connected with deep CIA ties. CIA's plots to assassinate Castro could have prompted preemptive retaliation But the counterpoints on this is that Castro denied involvement, knowing such action would likely lead to the U.S. invasion of Cuba. And there's no substantial evidence whatsoever that ties Cuban groups to Oswald or the assassination planning. If anti-Castro groups were behind the attack, it's unlikely they would use Oswald, who had pro-Castro leanings. So, in the cat eye. And we can move on to an industrial complex theory. The theory on this one is that JFK's push for nuclear disarmament and withdrawal from Vietnam threatened the profits and influence of defense contractors. I could see how that would happen, for sure. I can see how people were making a lot of money off the war. And the military. You know, I guess the theory behind this is that it threatened the profits and influence of the military establishment and the defense contractors. And the supporting points on this is that JFK's peace initiatives and disarmament talks worried powerful military figures. The Vietnam War escalation after JFK's death benefited defense contractors. I think Lyndon B. Johnson was involved in that. And then Eisenhower's warning about the military-industrial complex lends credibility to this concern. The counterpoints on this, of course, no direct evidence connecting the military. And then while JFK's policy were controversial, his Vietnam strategy wasn't fully clear at the time of his death. Basically, nobody really knew what he wanted to do, but there were some things that were threatening the military, and the theory is that they assassinated him because of these threats to take away basically their power, their influence, and their money. Yeah, that would piss some people off. I could see how that one would, come into play. So right now I'm going to do this cat eye thing. I'm going to make this point here go out. And I'm going to bring this over. It's with this brush. Okay, moving on. I guess there was no direct evidence, and then the military had other means of influencing policy without resorting to assassination. So they're saying, sorry, we don't have to resort to this, to get our influence out there. We're going to put this is number 7, which is the Lyndon B. Johnson involvement theory. This is the one I think is the most plausible. He had the most to gain. He was vice president at the time of Kennedy's assassination, therefore making him immediately president once Kennedy was shot. The theory behind this, LBJ wanted Kennedy gone for personal and political gain, fearing he'd be dropped from the 1964 ticket and embroiled in scandals. Supporting points on this was that LBJ had ties to Texas power players, including those involved in the motorcade planning, and reports claim that LBJ had heated arguments with JFK and feared his political career's end. LBJ benefited the most, immediately becoming president, like I said, and escalating Vietnam involvement. Counterpoints on this, no direct evidence or concrete evidence leading LBJ to the plot or tying him to the plot. And LBJ was a seasoned politician, unlikely to risk everything on such a dangerous conspiracy. Sorry, I think he would. That's the one I believe happened. I believe LBJ had some shit going on, excuse my language, and he had a bunch of scandals. One, I guess, was actually happening in court at the time that he was in this motorcade. And I read that the judge said, well, I guess we can just throw this out because LBJ's president as soon as the assassination happened. So I think that LBJ was dirty and he planned the assassination. That's my thoughts. And I think he had the defense contractors and the military in his pocket and said, hey, we'll stay in Vietnam as long as I'm president, and we'll still make you money, da 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 da. That's what I think. But I guess there's no concrete evidence that tied him, and the theory relies heavily on hearsay and speculation. Normally, hearsay and speculation is the most truthful. But what do I know? Okay, moving on to number 8, Secret Service negligence or complicity theory. So this one states that the Secret Service security failures were too numerous to be coincidental, suggesting possible complicity. Supporting points on this is that the route change and the lack of proper, security protocols were suspicious. The Secret Service agents were seen drinking heavily the night before, impairing their readiness. They drank a lot back then. I don't know if that has anything to do with it. I mean, come on. Back then, you could say a lot of people had problems with their readiness because a lot of people drank back then. And then JFK's open-top car was an unusual and vulnerable choice. Yeah, I agree with that. But I don't think they knew any better back then. Counterpoints on this is that the Secret Service admitted failures, but incompetence doesn't imply conspiracy. And there's no evidence of active involvement of any agents, and the route and security decisions were partly driven by local officials, which spells to me LBJ. LBJ, 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 do it this way, get this car, blah, 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 blah. So now I'm using the blue. And there's number 9, the umbrella man theory. This one's stupid, in my opinion. I guess the theory, there was a man that was standing near the grassy knoll. It was a sunny day. He had a black umbrella, and it was open. And people think because it was a sunny day that having this umbrella open was just odd. Well, yeah, it is a little odd, but they said it could have been used as a weapon or to signal the assassins. Well, this one's my least believable one. Definitely. The supporting points on this was the timing and placement of the umbrella. It raised immediate suspicions, and some believe it was a visual signal for shooters or a weapon disguised as an umbrella. I guess the counterpoints was the umbrella man was identified and interviewed, and he claimed that it was a political protest referencing Neville Chamberlain's appeasement of Hitler. The guy should be arrested just for that. I don't care if you're involved in the assassination or not. Arrest that guy. Anybody who has an appeasement of Hitler needs to go. Gotta go. Go, go, go. So